Padme Amidala had learned to read a room the way other people read weather, the way farmers read clouds and sailors taste the wind. The Senate chamber on Corasont had its own skies, its own storms. She could feel them now, fear pressing down like low ceiling, pride flaring in brief brittle bursts, and a hunger under it all, an appetite for safety that had begun to resemble an appetite for power. The pods floated in their slow, circling orbits, each a small island of authority, each senator a sovereign with nowhere to set their crown but their own brow. Today those crowns were heavy. Padme saw hands gripping railings, knuckles pale, eyes glassy from sleepless nights and casualty reports. The war had barely begun, and already it had made the Republic old. At the center dais, Chief Palpatine held the chamber in the same way a bonfire holds the night, by being the brightest thing, by promising warmth while teaching everyone to huddle close. His voice rolled out, steady as law, as he thanked the Jedi, praised the clones, lamented the separatist aggression. He spoke of unity the way a priest spoke of salvation. Padme listened with the same disciplined attention she gave to enemy transmissions. She had opposed the creation of the army. She had argued until her throat burned, had pleaded for negotiation until her colleagues smiled at her like indulgent relatives. And then the vote had gone the other way. It always did lately. Not because they were evil. Padme still believed most of them weren't. But because they were tired. Because they were scared. Applause rose like forced prayer. She watched Sheev's expression as it happened. Not joy, not triumph, but a patient satisfaction. The look of someone watching a mechanism they had built finally start to run. Her own pod drifted past Alderaan's. Bail Organa stood there, tall and composed, the kind of man who could make restraint look like strength instead of fear. Beside him, Mon Mothma looked as if she'd slept in her robes, the folds of pale fabric hanging like a shroud. Both of them met Padme's gaze, and in the small tilt of Bael's head she read a question. "Are you seeing it too?" Padme's mouth tightened. "Yes," she thought. "I'm seeing it." When the session ended, the chamber exhaled, pods docking, senators filing out, guards shifting their spears and blasters with the ceremonial gravity of a court that still pretended it wasn't a fortress. Overhead, banners of the Republic hung like fated victories. Sheev stepped down from the dais to a knot of aides. Masa Meda leaned close, his long face solemn. The red of his formal wear made him look like a wound walking. Padme turned away before she could be seen staring. She did not want Sheev's attention. Not yet. Not until she knew what to do with it. Bael's voice was quiet enough to be mistaken for courtesy. "You should have left on time," he said, as if they were discussing a dinner engagement instead of the direction of history. Padme kept her stride measured. The corridor carried sound strangely. Whispers could climb walls here. "I wanted to hear how he framed it," she replied. "He's careful with his words." Mon's fingers worried the edge of her sleeve. "He isn't careful," she said. "He's deliberate." They moved beneath towering statues of ancient chancellors, faces carved in marble certainty. Their eyes stared forward, blind to the fact that the Republic they had served was now being reshaped by emergency decrees and fear. Padme wondered what those old stone men would have thought of soldiers grown in vats, of Jedi turned into generals, of senators voting away their own authority in the name of preserving it. Bael glanced back over his shoulder. A pair of guards followed at a respectful distance, the Senate's own crimson-armored protectors. They were meant to be reassuring. Today they felt like a reminder. Even here, even now, the Republic moved with weapons at its back. "They'll ask for another extension," Mon murmured. "Emergency powers renew themselves like weeds." Padme's stomach knotted. "We gave him the first one to respond to the crisis," she said. "We told ourselves it was temporary. And he told us what we wanted to hear," Bael said softly. "That he would relinquish them when the danger passed." The danger would never pass. Padme could hear it in the language used on the floor. The separatists were not an opposing political bloc. They were an existential infection. You did not negotiate with infection, you cauterized it. At a junction, the corridor widened into an atrium where a fountain murmured over polished stone. A handful of senators lingered, speaking in clustered groups, their voices brittle. A holographic casualty list scrolled in the air above a news kiosk like a prayer roll for the dead. Maughan's eyes flicked to it, then away. How many more votes like today's before the Senate is ceremonial? Bail stopped near the fountain, turning as if to admire it. His posture was casual. His gaze was not. We don't have the luxury of waiting to find out, he said. There are provisions. Old ones. Buried in old law and older contracts. Nay. Padme felt her pulse sharpen. What? Why? Bail's expression didn't change, but his eyes held hers. Not here, he said. Maughan nodded once, tight. Not anywhere the walls can listen. Padme looked past them to the open atrium, to the guards, to the senators who laughed too loudly at jokes not worth laughing at. Her own reflection caught in the fountain's surface. A young face that had aged in the last year. Eyes that had seen battlefields on screens and bodies returned to Naboo with state honors. All right, she said. Tonight. Bail's breath eased, just barely. Tonight, he agreed. And the word landed between them like a stone dropped into deep water. Padme's apartment had been designed to impress diplomats. High ceilings, clean lines, windows that turned the city into living art. Tonight it felt less like a home, and more like a keep. Outside, Coruscant's endless towers glittered under rain, each light a citizen unaware of what their representatives were planning behind glass and security codes. Padme stood at the window a moment, watching traffic streams loop like glowing serpents. War had changed the night. Patrol craft moved in slow, authoritative arcs. The sky no longer belonged entirely to civilians. Behind her, Bail and Mon waited at the low table. A small lamp cast warm light over a scatter of paper. Actual paper, not data cards. Bail had insisted. No signal, he'd said. No trace. The paper smelled faintly of Naboo's reeds, a comfort Padme hadn't realized she needed until it was here. Anakin Skywalker leaned near the doorway, a shadow in Jedi robes. He had come without being asked, as if Padme's danger was an equation he solved instinctively. Secret meeting at night, plus senators equals threat. He tried to look like he wasn't listening. He failed. Padme crossed the room and sat. "Show me," she said. Bail slid a page toward her. In the center was a seal, an official Republic stamp, and beneath it, language written in the cold precision of legal tradition. "It's from the procurement contract," Bail said. "The one filed when the army was..." He hesitated, the old disbelief still catching. "Discovered." Mon's lips pressed thin. "Purchased," she corrected, bitter. Bail's eyes didn't leave Padme. "The purchaser is the Senate," he said. "Not the Chancellor, not the Jedi, the Senate." Padme's fingers hovered over the page. She could feel the weight of the words without even reading them, like she could feel the weight of a blaster pointed at her back without turning around. "That's standard," she said cautiously. "The Senate authorizes expenditures." "Yes," Bail said. "But look at the contingency clause." Padme read, "In the event of executive incapacitation, compromise, or breach of constitutional continuity, custodial authority for Republic military assets may be transferred to the legislative body under emergency quorum, pending restoration of lawful executive function." Her throat went dry. "Custodial authority," she murmured. Mon nodded. "It's a leash," she said. A leash the Senate didn't know it had. Padme looked up sharply. "How can we not know what's in our own contracts?" Bail's expression carried the weary truth of bureaucracy. "Because no one reads all of them," he said. "Because the Senate is drowning in paper and war and politics. Because we assumed procurement was mundane." Padme's gaze flicked to Anakin. He watched her with a tension that was almost physical, as if he could sense the line she might cross and feared it. Mon leaned forward. "We don't need the clause," she said. "Not yet. But its existence means something else exists. An avenue. A structure. A legal framework the Kaminoans would have built around." "The Kaminoans," Padme repeated, feeling cold. "They're the ones who wrote this. They're the ones who inserted it," Bail agreed. "And if they inserted it, they anticipated a scenario where the Senate might need direct control." Anakin's voice cut in, controlled but edged. "Or they anticipated how to protect their investment," he said. "Cloners don't care about your constitution." Padme didn't flinch. "They care about getting paid," she said. "And about staying necessary." Bail tapped another sheet. "There are addenda," he said. "Subcontracts for civil defense auxiliaries. Never executed, never funded. Filed, sealed, forgotten." Mon's eyes shone with a kind of sorrowful fury. "We can fund them," she said. "Quietly. Not an army for the front. An army for the Senate, for the people. A safeguard." Padme felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The irony tasted like blood. She had fought to prevent the birth of one army, and now she was considering creating another. But this wasn't about conquest. This was about a balance. A check. A door that could not be locked from the inside. "Loyal only to the Senate," she whispered, testing the words. Anakin's jaw tightened. "The Senate is 1,000 voices," he said. "It's not a person. It's not stable." "That's the point," Mon said. "No single hand holds it." Bail's gaze was steady. "We would need strict safeguards," he admitted. "A committee. Multiple seals. Quorum. The clones would obey procedures, not personalities." Padme stared down at the clause again. The paper seemed to pulse under the lamplight, alive with possibility. Somewhere beyond the window, the city roared on, oblivious. At the door, Anakin shifted, his presence a reminder that the Jedi were now generals, and the Republic's swords were being swung by monks who had never sought crowns. Padme inhaled slowly. "If we do nothing," she said, "we drift into whatever Sheev wants us to become." Bail didn't correct her use of the Chancellor's first name. In this room, titles felt like lies. Mon's voice softened, almost pleading. "Then we do something," she said. Padme looked at the paper until the words blurred. When she finally lifted her head, her decision was in her eyes before she spoke. "Contact Kamino," she said. "But no transmissions from here, no official channels. We do this like we're smuggling medicine into a famine." Anakin's gaze locked onto hers. "Padme," he warned. She held it. "If the Republic is sick," she said quietly, "then medicine looks like treason to the fever." Kamino's reign was not like Corasant's. Corasant's reign fell through exhaust and neon and the sigh of 1,000,000,000 lives. Kamino's reign fell out of a sky that had never learned mercy. It struck the platforms in sheets, turning the world into a constant percussion of water and wind, as if the ocean itself were trying to claw its way back up and reclaim the metal islands. Lama Su walked with the slow grace of a creature that had never needed haste to survive. His long neck rose from ceremonial armor that shimmered like fish scales, his eyes unblinking as he moved through a corridor lit in pale, sterile hues. Tonwi glided beside him, hands folded, her expression a trained neutrality. "The message was encoded," Ton said. "Not Republic military cipher, Senate administrative." Lama's lips barely moved. "Senate," he repeated, tasting the word. It had always amused him how organic governments pretended their bodies were unified when they were clearly made of competing organs. Ton's tone remained polite. "It requests a discreet audience." "And offers funding," Lama said, as if finishing a predictable sentence. They entered a lab where the air smelled of antiseptic and salt. Rows of amniotic tanks glowed softly, each holding a human form suspended in fluid. In the dim, the bodies looked like drowned saints in glass coffins. Nala stood among them, hands clasped behind her back. Her gaze moved from tank to tank with an intimacy that bordered on affection. "You read the request," she said without preamble. Lama inclined his head. I did. Nala stepped closer. Her voice lowered, as if the clones themselves could hear. They want a second line, she said. Not designated for battlefield deployment, a custodial force. Tawn's eyebrows rose a fraction. Answerable to the Senate? Nala's mouth tightened. That is the phrasing. Lama's eyes narrowed. We anticipated this, he said. That is why the clause exists. Tawn's voice was careful. Anticipated a Senate rebellion against their executive? Anticipated instability, Lama corrected. Organic politics is instability. Nala turned toward a tank at the far end. Inside, a young clone, perhaps 8 in apparent age, floated with eyes closed, lips slightly parted as if dreaming of air. A thin scar ran along the back of his neck, still healing from an implant procedure. We have already begun the cohort, Nala said. Not in full scale, but the base work, embryos, conditioning frameworks. We did it as an insurance policy. Tawn's gaze sharpened. Without authorization. Lama's head tilted. With authorization, he said smoothly. With a clause. With a possibility. With our own understanding that war increases demand. Nay. Nala's eyes remained on the sleeping child. The Chancellor believes he holds the army, she said quietly. He believes the Jedi do. But the army is ours. It is our product. Our achievement. Lama's tone softened, almost indulgent. And our leverage, he said. A chime sounded. Tawn lifted a datapad, scanned it. The Senate representatives propose a sealed committee, multiple verification keys, orders transmitted only with quorum. Nala's fingers flexed, as if remembering the feel of the chips she implanted. They want loyalty to procedure, she murmured. Not to a single voice. Lama's gaze flicked to her. Can you do it? Nala's answer came too quickly. Yes, she said. We can imprint behavioral constraints. We can design the biochips to require layered authorization. We can... She stopped herself, then continued more slowly. We can do what they ask. Tawn's neutrality cracked into something like doubt. And if the Chancellor discovers it? Lama looked past them, as if he could see through walls and storms and across hyperspace to Corasant's shining towers. Then he will do what organics always do when threatened, he said. He will attempt to seize what he does not understand. Nala's voice was almost a whisper. Then we must ensure he cannot. Lama smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. Arrange the audience, he told Tawn. Discreetly. Tawn bowed her head. As you wish. Nala turned back to the tanks. The child within the glass coffin drifted, weightless, unaware that he had been born into a war and now into a conspiracy. Outside, the ocean hurled itself against the platform's supports with the fury of an old god-denied sacrifice. The Jedi Temple had always felt like distance to Padme. Distance from hunger, from corruption, from the small pettiness of politics. Tonight it felt like a fortress at the edge of a collapsing world. The halls were quiet in that disciplined way the Jedi favored, but the silence had changed. It was not peace. It was strain held in place by training. Obi-Wan Kenobi met her in a corridor lined with tall pillars. His beard looked darker than she remembered, his eyes a shade more tired. War had put a weight on him that even the Force could not lift. Senator, he greeted, inclining his head. It's been a while. Too long, Padme said. Her voice echoed faintly off stone. She watched a pair of clones march past, helmets tucked under their arms. Without the armor, they looked painfully young. With it, they looked like myths made metal. Obi-Wan followed her gaze. They're adapting, he said. Faster than I expected. They weren't given the option not to, Padme replied. Obi-Wan's mouth curved into something that might once have been a smile. No, he conceded. They weren't. Padme had come to ask questions she couldn't ask in the Senate. The irony tasted bitter. She was seeking counsel from an order she did not control, about an army she had not wanted, while planning a secret force that would answer to the institution she served. She forced herself to speak plainly. "When you were on Kamino," she said, "did you see anything beyond what we were told?" Obi-Wan's expression sharpened. "Beyond." Padme chose her words carefully. "Any signs that the cloners anticipated more than one buyer," she said. "More than one chain of command." Obi-Wan's gaze held hers for a long moment. She could feel him weighing not just her words, but her intent, the way Jedi always seemed to measure the space behind a sentence. "The Kaminoans are meticulous," he said at last. "They keep records. They have redundancies. But I saw nothing that suggested a second army." Padme didn't let her relief show. "Nothing," she echoed. Obi-Wan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why are you asking?" She could have lied. Politics had made lying easy. But something in Obi-Wan's exhausted honesty made it hard to hide behind the usual veils. "Because I'm afraid," she said quietly. "Not of the separatists. Not even of the war. I'm afraid of what we're becoming while we fight it." "Nun, Gandiwasha." Obi-Wan's gaze softened, a fraction. For a heartbeat he looked less like a general and more like the Jedi he had been before Geonosis. "Fear is understandable," he said, and the pause before the word felt like a blade being carefully set down. "But it can lead to desperate choices." Padme almost laughed. Because if Obi-Wan knew what she was considering, he would say the same thing with twice the weight. "I met Qui-Gon once," she said, surprising herself. The name came out like a ghost. "He told me the Republic was worth serving because it belonged to its people, not to its leaders." Obi-Wan's eyes flickered with memory and grief. "He believed that," he said, "even when it cost him." Padme looked past him to the temple's high window, where Corasant's stormlight made the city look like a living bruise. "If it costs us now," she said, "what will be left to save?" Obi-Wan's voice lowered. "Padme," he said gently, using her first name as if it were a bridge. "If you're walking toward something dangerous." She cut in, careful. "I'm walking towards something," she said. "That's all." Obi-Wan watched her, and she felt for a moment that he could see the outlines of her secret like shapes beneath cloth. Finally he said, "Be cautious." And the words carried the weight of a warning offered without accusation. "The Chancellor has many eyes." Padme's throat tightened. "So does the Senate," she said, and even as she said it she wondered whether it was still true. The archive vault beneath the Senate was a place most politicians never saw. It lay under the layers of marble grandeur like the bones under flesh, unseen, essential, and ignored until something broke. A clerk led Padme, Bail, and Mon through a corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and old dust. His hood was drawn, not from secrecy but from habit. The archivists dressed like monks, as if reverence for paperwork could be mistaken for holiness. "This section is restricted," the clerk said, voice flat. "Committee-level clearance only." Bail handed over a coded token. "Then it's fortunate we're a committee," he said, with the calm confidence of a man who knew how to make doors open. The clerk scanned it, hesitated, then stepped aside. 10 minutes, he said. "No copies." Padme's palms dampened. She had faced assassins and spoken before millions, yet the hush of this place made her feel like a thief. They reached a table where an old contract was stored in a sealed case. Not paper, too fragile, but a hardened polymer sheet etched with microtext and embedded with security threads. It looked like an ancient oath tablet, the kind kings in old stories swore upon. Mon traced the edge without touching it. "This is older than the war," she murmured. Bail nodded. "Filed the moment the Senate accepted the army," he said. "But the addenda were written earlier. The Kaminoans anticipated long-term production." Padme leaned closer as Bail activated a projection. Blue light spilled into the dim air, forming lines of text that floated like spirits. Clauses and subclauses unfolded, each one a small cage built out of words. "There," Bail said, pointing. "Subcontract. Civil Defense Auxiliary Cohort. Status: dormant. Funding: none. Execution: postponed, pending legislative authorization. Mon's breath caught. They prepared a template, she said. They built an empty room and left it waiting. Padme's eyes scanned the legal language. It was cold and precise, and somehow that made it more terrifying. Conspiracies were supposed to be dramatic. This was bureaucracy, quiet and lethal. The language is intentionally vague, Bale said. It allows for classification as Senate security, emergency services, planetary reinforcement. Anything that can be justified as defense of the Republic's civil institutions. No. Padme looked at the clerk in the doorway. He stared past them with the practiced detachment of someone who had learned not to see. Still, her voice stayed low. How do we fund it without Sheev noticing? Mon's smile was humorless. We do what the Senate always does, she said. We bury it in committees. Bale nodded. Relief appropriations, he said. Reconstruction, refugee support. We create a line item for institutional security infrastructure. Padme felt her stomach turn. And the money goes to Kamino. Through intermediaries, Bale said. A procurement firm, a shell contract. Everything legal, everything hidden. Mon's gaze hardened. The Chancellor's office monitors major military expenditures, she said. But this isn't a military expenditure. Not officially. Padme stared at the projection until her eyes watered. Somewhere above them, senators debated troop movements and supply chains and casualty projections. They believed the war was the crisis. They did not see the slow change in governance happening in the dark. Bale deactivated the projection as the clerk's time limit loomed like a blade. We have enough, he said. Padme didn't move immediately. She imagined the clones in their tanks on Kamino, growing without choice. She imagined another cohort, one created not for battle but for politics, for the preservation of an institution that might already be rotting. Mon touched Padme's wrist lightly, a rare gesture of intimacy. We can't stop the war, she said. But we can stop the Republic from being swallowed by it. Padme swallowed hard. Or we can accelerate the swallowing, she whispered. Bale's gaze was steady. Then we do this with strict limits, he said. We do it like an antidote, not like a weapon. Padme finally nodded, and the motion felt like a door closing behind her. On delivered the Senate's request in a room designed for secrecy. No windows, no outside sound, only the soft hum of shielding fields and the faint, ever-present vibration of ocean below. A hologram of the Senate seal floated above a dark table, its familiar emblem rendered strange by Kamino's blue light. It looked less like a symbol of democracy, and more like a sigil carved into ice. The representatives insist on anonymity, Ton said. They require confirmation that the cohort will be trained under Senate-specific doctrine. Lama's long fingers tapped the table once. Doctrine, he repeated. Organic rituals. Nala's gaze remained fixed on a projected embryo display, a cluster of cells rotating in a field of light. Doctrine can be engineered, she said. If that is what they want, we can build it into the training, into the reinforcement structures, into the very language the clones hear before they understand words. Ton tilted her head. What they want is loyalty. Nala's voice sharpened. What they want is predictability, she corrected. Loyalty to a body of 1,000 voices is messy. We can make them loyal to process, to verification, to seals. None. And a Z. And a lira eyes. Lama studied the Senate sigil. They will try to use this against their executive, he said. Ton's tone stayed neutral. If their executive becomes a tyrant, it is not unreasonable. Lama's eyes narrowed. Then the tension eased as if he'd decided it wasn't worth entertaining. Organics talk of tyranny, as if it is a monster that arrives uninvited, he said. Usually it is invited. Usually it is welcomed. Nala's hands clasped behind her back. There is an additional complication, she said. Ton looked at her. Speak. Nala's gaze did not waver. The existing behavioral modification chips are designed to respond to a singular command architecture. They were built for battlefield obedience. To create this cohort, we would need a different architecture, layered keys, multiple triggers, a lock that requires several hands. Lama's attention sharpened. Can it be done without destabilizing the subjects? It can be done, Nala said. Then, after a pause, but it must be done carefully. Conditioning for loyalty to abstraction requires more cognitive reinforcement. They must understand the idea of the Senate as more than a name. Ton's voice held a hint of concern. Understanding can lead to questioning. Nala's mouth tightened. Questioning is not rebellion, she said. It is a function. We can teach them what to question and what to accept. We do it already. Lama's gaze slid to the embryo projection again. We should offer them a cohort not of brute numbers but of quality, he said. A smaller force, elite, trained for institutional security, enough to matter. Not enough to threaten us. Ton nodded slowly. And if the Chancellor demands oversight? Lama's thin smile returned. Then we show him what he expects to see, he said. And not what he does not. Nala's eyes flicked, briefly, to a sealed door on the far side of the chamber. A door marked with no signage. Behind it lay the restricted labs, the places even many Kaminoans did not enter without authorization. We will need a facility separate from standard production, she said. Separate staff, separate records. Lama's tone was smooth. Then begin the separation. Ton held the Senate seal in her hands as if it were a fragile thing. Their representatives request an oath, she said. A ceremonial phrase for the clones to swear. Nala's eyes, for the first time, looked almost curious. An oath, she murmured. For a manufactured soldier. Lama's gaze lingered on the seal. Give them their ritual, he said. Rituals make organics feel in control. Outside the chamber, the storm struck the city with relentless force. Inside, the future was being drafted in quiet syllables and cold light. Sheev sat alone longer than most men could tolerate. He did it because loneliness was useful. It made other people uncomfortable, which made them careless. Tonight, when Mass entered, Sheev did not look up immediately. He let the moment stretch, long enough for Mass to feel the weight of interrupting. The Appropriations Committee filed a new line item, Mass said at last, voice measured. Institutional security infrastructure, under refugee stabilization. Sheev's pen paused over a datapad. How compassionate, he said. Maz's long fingers tightened around the report he carried. It is unusual, he added carefully. The sum is not insignificant, and the routing is complex. Sheev finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were calm, almost gentle. Complex routing usually means one of two things, he said. Corruption or fear. Mas hesitated. Which do you suspect? Sheev smiled. Both, he said. In the shadows near the window, Sly Moore stood as still as sculpture, her pale eyes reflecting the city lights like distant stars. Sheev did not need to ask her to listen. She listened to everything. The committee names are sealed, Mas continued. But Senator Organa's office appears in the chain. Sheev's smile did not falter. Bail, he murmured, as if recalling a minor character in a play. And where Bail goes, Padme often follows. Mas inclined his head. Shall I? No, Sheev said softly, and the single syllable carried authority like iron. Not yet. Mas's gaze flicked towards Sly, then back. If they are diverting funds. They believe they are protecting the Republic, Sheev said, his tone almost indulgent. That is what makes them dangerous, not their ambition, their virtue. Mas swallowed. Should we investigate the destination? Sheev's pen resumed its motion, smooth and unhurried. Quietly, he said. We do not want them to know they are seen. People behave differently when they believe they are in darkness. Sly's voice came from the shadows, soft and precise. Senator Amidala met with Senator Mothma 2 nights ago, she said. No official record. The meeting occurred in an apartment registered under a family trust. Security was Jedi. Sheev's pen stopped. Jedi, he echoed, and the word carried a faint amusement. How loyal. Maz's expression tightened. If the Jedi are involved. They are not, Sheev said, and he sounded certain. If they were, they would have announced it and called it transparency. Maz said nothing. He rarely did when Sheev's tone carried finality. Sheev leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Rain traced slow lines down the window, turning Corasant's skyline into a blurred tapestry of light. Let them build their little safeguards, he said. Let them imagine they are balancing a scale. Maz's mouth opened, then closed, uncertain. Chancellor, if they are creating a force outside your command. Sheev's eyes gleamed. Then it will come to me eventually, he said. All forces do. Sly's gaze never moved. And if it does not? She asked. Sheev's smile deepened by a fraction. Then it will reveal itself, he said. And revelation is always useful. He picked up the report Maz had brought, skimmed it with the ease of someone who understood systems better than people. When he set it down, his voice was quiet. Send a courtesy note to the committee, he said. Praise their concern for institutional stability. Offer support. Nunum. Maz blinked. Support? Of Sheev said pleasantly. Nothing disarms suspicion like kindness. Maz bowed and left. In the silence that followed, Sheev stared at the rain and imagined threads stretching from the Senate to Kamino. From Kamino to the clones, from clones to the Jedi, from Jedi to the war, and from the war to him. He did not need to see the whole tapestry to know where the knots were forming. The committee room smelled of old ink and recycled air. It was a place where dreams went to be translated into numbers, where ideals were stripped down into line items and questioned until they bled justification. Padme sat with her hands folded, posture perfect. She wore a darker gown than usual, the kind that made her look less like a symbol and more like a shadow. Mon sat beside her, expression composed with effort. Across the table, 3 bureaucrats, men and women who had never held a blaster but could cripple worlds with a pen, waited with polite suspicion. Bail stood behind Padme's chair, not looming, simply present. His presence suggested legitimacy, and legitimacy was a weapon. You are requesting a reallocation, the League bureaucrat said. His voice had the flat tone of someone who believed emotion was a sign of inefficiency. From refugee stabilization into institutional security. Padme nodded. Refugees are not stabilized if the institutions meant to protect them collapse, she said. The bureaucrat's eyes narrowed. That is philosophical. It is practical, Mon said, her voice calm. We have received reports of increased threats to government infrastructure, espionage, sabotage, panic. The Senate district is a target. The second bureaucrat, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a datapad clasped like a shield, made a note. Your request includes external procurement, she said. A non-standard vendor. Bale leaned forward slightly, voice warm. The vendor specializes in security infrastructure, he said. Discreet, reliable. They have served several core world institutions. Padme did not blink. The vendor was a fiction layered over a shell company layered over a procurement firm that would eventually wire credits to Kamino through a path twisted enough to make any investigator dizzy. The first bureaucrat tapped a stylus against his ledger. You are aware that the Chancellor's office monitors significant expenditures during wartime, he said. Mon's smile was faint. We are aware, she said. Which is why we are keeping this within Senate administrative purview. The woman's gaze flicked to Padme. Senator Amidala, she said, you were publicly opposed to the creation of the clone army, It is surprising to see your name attached to any procurement that could be perceived as militarized. Padme felt the question like a needle searching for weakness. She did not flinch. I opposed creating an army to fight a war we did not fully understand, she said. I do not oppose protecting civilians and democratic institutions from collapse. The bureaucrat's mouth tightened. And the distinction is... The distinction, Padme said, voice firm, is that this does not march to the front. It stands at the door. Menda. Bale's hand settled lightly on the back of her chair. Support and a reminder. Padme kept her gaze steady. She imagined Sheev's office, imagined his smile, imagined him receiving reports. She wondered how long they could keep the door closed. The lead bureaucrat sighed as if burdened by other people's urgency. The Senate may authorize protective measures, he conceded. But the scale... Mon slid a document across the table. Scaled appropriately, she said. Pilot program. Limited numbers. Full committee oversight. The woman scanned it, frowning. The language is... careful. Bale smiled. Polite. We have learned, he said. Silence stretched. In it, Padme could hear the war like a distant drum. She thought of Naboo, green and peaceful, and how far away it felt. At last, the lead bureaucrat stamped the document with a seal. The sound was small, but it landed like a gavel. Approved for committee review and provisional allocation, he said. Pending final Senate confirmation. Padme exhaled slowly. Her hands remained folded, but she felt as if she'd just signed her name in blood. As they rose to leave, Mon leaned close enough that only Padme could hear. One stamp, she whispered. 1,000 more to go. Padme nodded. And everyone a knife, she murmured back. The boy's name was a number. It was easier that way. Numbers did not invite attachment. Nala had told herself that for years, long enough that it had become something like faith. He stood at the edge of the training hall, bare feet on cold metal, watching older clones move through drills with mechanical precision. They marched in lines, turned on command, practiced formations meant for corridors and crowds rather than trenches. Their instructors spoke in clipped tones, teaching restraint as much as aggression. The boy's eyes followed everything. He absorbed movement like water absorbs salt. Nala stood beside him, posture straight, hands clasped behind her back. Repeat the oath, she said. The boy didn't hesitate. I serve the Senate, he recited. His voice was clear, young. I serve the people. I obey lawful procedure. I defend the Republic's institutions. I act with restraint. I act with purpose. Nala's gaze narrowed slightly. Again, she said. He repeated it. Perfect. On the far side of the glass wall, rows of amniotic tanks glowed in dim light, dozens upon dozens of bodies floating in artificial wombs. They looked peaceful. They were not. A Kaminoan technician approached. Voice hushed. The first batch is responding well, the technician said. Cognitive development is stable. Nala's eyes never left the boy. And the chips? She asked. In place, the technician said. Layered architecture, multiple verification pathways. Nala's mouth tightened. No anomalies? The technician hesitated. A few subjects display heightened curiosity, they admitted. They ask questions about the Senate, about laws, about what happens if the Senate disagrees. Nala felt a flicker of irritation, and beneath it, something stranger. Pride, perhaps. Curiosity meant cognition. Cognition meant adaptability. Adaptability meant survival. And if these clones were to be loyal to an institution rather than a single commander, they would need minds sharp enough to grasp the difference. They will learn that disagreement is resolved by procedure, Nala said. Not by violence. The boy turned his head slightly, as if he'd heard. His gaze met hers for a heartbeat, quiet, searching, not rebellious, not submissive. Present. Nala almost looked away. She did not like being seen. "What is your designation?" she asked him. He answered instantly. "CT-799-NE," he said. Nala nodded. "Do you understand why you exist?" she asked. The question was not part of the script. It slipped out like a blade sliding free. The boy's brow furrowed, just a little. "To serve," he said. Then, after a pause that was a fraction too long for comfort, "to protect." "Protect what?" Nala asked, voice colder. "The Senate," he said. And then, as if the word wasn't enough, "the people inside it." Nala's throat tightened. She thought of Coruscant's shining towers. She thought of politicians moving pieces on boards they barely understood. She thought of Sheev's calm smile and how it looked in her mind, like an ocean that pretended it wasn't drowning worlds. "Good," she said, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Her palm felt his heat through thin skin, the pulse of a living being built on purpose. He stood still under her touch, eyes forward, oath already waiting on his tongue like prayer. Dorme hated the lower levels of Coruscant. The air tasted wrong. Too much metal. Too much smoke. Too many lives stacked on each other until privacy became myth. Even the lights felt predatory, neon flickering like torch fire over damp stone. She kept her hood up and her pace steady, moving through a market that sold everything from counterfeit ration cards to real medicine. Refugees from outer systems clustered near heat vents, hands out, eyes empty. The war was already here, in the places senators never saw. The courier waited where they'd agreed, beside a stall selling dried fruit and cheap stimulants, a scar cutting down one cheek like a signature. His eyes swept the crowd with a soldier's instinct. Dorme's fingers tightened around the sealed case hidden beneath her cloak. Credits, encoded. Procurement tokens. The first pulse of money that would become an army. "You're late," the courier said, voice low. "I had to be careful," Dorme replied. She forced her voice to remain calm. She was a handmaiden, trained for composure, but this was not the palace. This was the Undercity. Here, composure was only useful if it didn't get you killed. The courier's gaze flicked to her hands. "Show it," he said. Dorme slid the case forward. The courier produced a second case, identical in size, and held it out in return. "What's that?" Dorme asked. "Receipts," he said. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a grin. "Paper, like your friends up top like to pretend they're ancient." Dorme's stomach tightened. "You're sure this reaches the right hands?" she demanded. The courier's eyes hardened. "It reaches hands that like credits," he said, "and hands that don't ask questions." "That's not an answer," Dorme snapped. The courier leaned closer. His breath smelled of spice and cheap liquor. "It reaches Kamino," he said softly, "through 5 layers of shells, and one very bored banker who thinks he's laundering money for a senator's mistress." Dorme's cheeks flushed under her hood, anger and shame mixing. "If anyone traces this, they won't," he said. "But if they do, they'll trace it to me first. And by the time they carve answers out of my bones, your Senate will have built whatever it wants." Dorme swallowed hard. She took the receipt case and tucked it away. As she turned to leave, she felt eyes on her. Not the usual Undercity hunger. Something sharper. She did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back often invited pursuit. She moved through the crowd, keeping to the edges, letting bodies shield her. Somewhere behind her, a street preacher shouted about the end of the Republic. A child cried. A vendor laughed too loudly. In the distance, a patrol of clones marched past, their white armor catching neon light like pale ghosts. Dorme watched them for a heartbeat and wondered what it meant to be born for someone else's decisions. At the corner, she slipped into a shadowed passage and activated her comlink, coded, brief. "First transfer complete," she murmured. Above, in the towers, senators debated morality. Below, in the wet dark, money moved like blood through veins, feeding something that had no name yet. The Senate Guard captain had been trained to stand still for hours without losing focus. It was a skill learned the way soldiers learn to sleep with one eye open. Through necessity, through discipline, through the quiet knowledge that history could hinge on a moment most people missed. He watched the holofeed with his helmet tucked under one arm, crimson armor reflecting the dim gallery lights. The feed showed Padme leaving the committee room, walking with Bail and Mon, their movements casual, their faces composed. The caption beneath it was bland, routine administrative meeting. Routine, the captain thought, meant nothing. Routine was the word used when people wanted you to stop asking. He tapped the feed, expanding it. Another angle showed the edge of a corridor, the flicker of a hooded figure, Dorme, disappearing into a service lift. The file flagged it as inconclusive. The captain's instincts disagreed. Behind him, Sly's presence was a chill rather than a sound. She had a way of standing that made the air around her feel thinner. "You're watching the senator," she said, voice smooth. The captain kept his gaze on the feed. "I'm watching patterns," he replied. Sly's pale eyes narrowed slightly. "What pattern do you see?" The captain hesitated. He did not like speaking guesses to people who collected them. "The senator has increased contact with certain offices," he said. "Committees she rarely attended before, refugee allocations, institutional security." Sly's expression remained unreadable. "And you suspect?" she prompted. The captain swallowed. "I suspect she is building something," he said. "Not public." Sly's lips curved faintly. "That is not a crime," she said. "It can be," the captain replied, and surprised himself with the firmness of his tone. He had sworn oaths to the Republic, to the Senate. Oaths meant less lately. Everything meant less when power concentrated like poison. Sly stepped closer, her voice softer. "Be cautious," she said. "Senator Amidala is beloved." The captain's jaw tightened. "Beloved people can still commit treason," he said. Sly's gaze held his. "And loyal people can still be used," she said. The captain felt a flare of irritation. "Is this an order?" he asked. Sly's smile was delicate. "No," she said. "A suggestion." He looked back to the holofeed. Padme paused at a doorway, speaking with someone off-frame. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were intense. She looked like a woman making decisions she did not like. The captain exhaled slowly. "I will keep watching," he said. Sly's voice drifted behind him like silk. "Good," she said. "Watching is how empires begin." He didn't respond, because he didn't know whether she meant it as warning or celebration. When she left, the gallery felt warmer, though the lights had not changed. The captain stared at the feed and wondered how many eyes watched him in return. Nakin waited until the door sealed and the security fields engaged before he spoke. When he did, his voice was low, dangerous in its restraint. "You're moving credits through the Undercity," he said. Padme froze for half a heartbeat. "You followed Dorme," she realized. "I watched her leave," Anakin corrected. "And I watched the pattern." Padme turned toward him fully. The room's soft lighting caught the tension in his face, the way his eyes seemed too bright, like a storm held behind glass. "You shouldn't be watching my staff," she said. "I shouldn't have to," he snapped, then reined it in, breathing hard as if anger were something he could physically swallow. "Padme, you're playing with knives." She felt the familiar flare of frustration. He always spoke as if danger were new, as if her life before him hadn't been a sequence of assassinations and political wars. "I live in the Senate," she said. "Knives are the furniture." Anakin stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. "This isn't a bill," he said. "This isn't a speech. This is clandestine. It looks like treason." Padme finished, voice flat. Anakin's jaw worked. He didn't deny it. "It looks like you're building a force outside the Republic command structure," he said. "And if the Chancellor discovers it..." "He already controls the Republic command structure," Padme cut in. That's the point. Anakin flinched as if her words struck a nerve. He's the Chancellor, he said. He was elected. He was given emergency powers, Padme said. Repeatedly. By us. Because we were afraid. And now we can't even tell where his authority ends and ours begins. Anakin's hands clenched. The Jedi can. The Jedi are generals, Padme said softly. You are. Obi-Wan is. You're leading soldiers who were bred to obey. You're fighting a war that gives Sheev more justification every day to hold on to power. Anakin's eyes flashed. You think I don't see that? He hissed. You think I don't feel it every time I receive an order that sounds less like defense and more like conquest? Padme's voice gentled despite herself. Then you understand why we need a safeguard, she said. Anakin shook his head, frustration spilling. A safeguard made of clones, he demanded. You know what they are. You know what was done to them. How can you? Padme's throat tightened. Don't, she warned, voice sharp. Don't make this about purity. The war already took that from us. Anakin's gaze softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. Who's behind this? He asked. Bail? Mon? Padme held his eyes. It's not your concern, she said. It is when it puts you in danger, Anakin said, voice breaking slightly on the word. She felt it then, the fear under his anger, raw and desperate. It was not the fear of political consequences. It was the fear of losing her. And that fear could be manipulated, could be used. She had seen Sheev do it to senators. She had seen him do it to whole systems. Padme stepped closer until their foreheads almost touched. Listen to me, she whispered. This is not an attempt to overthrow anyone. It's an attempt to ensure no one can overthrow us. Anakin's breath was uneven. You can't control this, he said. You can't control people grown for war. You can't control what power does once it exists. Padme's eyes burned. I can't control the war either, she said. But I can refuse to pretend the Senate is safe just because we sit in marble rooms. Anakin closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting himself. When he opened them, his voice was quieter. Promise me you'll stop if it turns wrong, he said. Padme's mouth tightened. Promises were dangerous. They were a way of comforting people into complacency. I promise you, she said instead, that I will watch it like it's a blade at my own throat. Anakin's shoulders sagged slightly, relief and dread mixing. He reached out finally and touched her hand. His fingers were warm, trembling faintly. Padme squeezed back, and in the intimacy of that simple gesture, she felt the enormity of what she was doing. Not just politically, personally. Every secret she kept was a wall between them, and walls had a way of becoming prisons. Outside, Corasant's rain fell without caring who it drowned. The implant was smaller than a fingernail. That was part of its elegance, a mechanism of obedience hidden in flesh, a quiet lever inside the skull. Nala held it between long fingers, studying the tiny circuitry as if it were a jewel. In a way, it was. It was the most valuable thing she could make, compliance. The clone on the table lay motionless, sedated. His face was calm, almost serene. Nala wondered if he dreamed. If so, she hoped it was of oceans, not of battle. A surgical droid hovered, tools poised. Subject prepared, it intoned. Nala nodded and positioned the implant at the base of the clone's skull. The skin there had been shaved clean. The incision would be neat, barely visible once healed. Behind the glass partition above, Lama watched with hands folded, his posture one of distant oversight. He did not interfere. He preferred to observe outcomes, not methods. Nala's voice was quiet as she spoke to the droid. This architecture is layered, she said. It will not respond to a single override command. It will require multiple confirmation strings transmitted in a specific sequence. The droid's head tilted. Purpose. Custodial obedience, Nala said. To procedure. To verification. to lawful authority defined by legislative quorum. The words sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud, like teaching a blade to obey poetry. Yet the science was sound. Conditioning, reinforcement, neural pathways. You could train a mind to associate certain symbols with safety and certain disobedience with pain. You could do it so early the subject never realized it was conditioning. The droid asked, "Risk of conflict with standard inhibitor protocols?" Nala's eyes narrowed. "We are not creating standard units," she said. The droid whirred, accepting. As she guided the implant into place, she felt a familiar detachment settle over her, the cold calm that came when she did work that others might call monstrous. On Kamino, they did not moralize. Morality was a luxury of those who did not build the instruments of war. And yet, lately, Nala had found herself thinking of morality more often. Not because she regretted her work, but because the organics were forcing morality into the equation. The Jedi spoke of honor and duty. The senators spoke of democracy and safety. The Chancellor spoke of unity. Everyone had a story. Kamino had only production. The implant slid into position with a soft click. "Seal," Nala ordered. The droid's tool moved, closing the incision with efficiency. Within hours, the skin would knit. Within days, the clone would wake with no memory of the procedure and no sense of the new chain now threaded through his mind. Nala removed her gloves slowly. "Record this subject as Cohort Auric," she said. "Flag for Senate conditioning track." The droid paused. "Cohort designation not recognized in standard registry." "It's not meant to be," Nala said, voice flat. "Create a separate registry, compartmentalized." The droid complied, cold and unquestioning, so much like the clones themselves. Nala turned toward the glass partition. Lama's gaze met hers. In his eyes she saw neither approval nor doubt. Only calculation. "You worry," Lama said through the comm speaker, as if reading the smallest shift in her posture. Nala's mouth tightened. "I do not worry," she said automatically. Lama's head tilted slightly. "Then why create redundancies?" he asked. "Why insist on secrecy beyond necessity?" Nala's hands clenched briefly. She forced them to relax. "Because the war is not the only thing being fought," she said quietly. "And because organics are unpredictable." Lama's thin smile returned. "That is why we profit," he said. Nala looked back at the sedated clone. His chest rose and fell, steady. A manufactured life, breathing. She had built a lock inside his skull. She told herself it was to protect the Senate, to protect the Republic. She did not tell herself the darker truth, that she did not trust any single organic with absolute authority. Not even the one who smiled like a patient fire. The vote was buried in an agenda thick with war. It came after casualty allocations, after emergency supply routes, after yet another motion to extend executive authority in the name of speed. By the time the clerk announced Refugee Stabilization Infrastructure Amendment, most senators' eyes had gone dull. Padme's pod drifted into position, her hands clasped so tightly her nails bit skin. She kept her face neutral. Politics was theater, and fear was visible if you let it show. Mon's pod hovered nearby. Mon stared straight ahead, jaw set, as if refusing to look toward the dais would keep she from reading her thoughts. Bael's pod approached from the opposite side, aligning so that when he spoke, his voice carried in the gap between their platforms without broadcasting. "Remember," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "We are not doing this for ourselves." Padme nodded once, eyes forward. "We're doing it because we have no other choice," she breathed back. The motion opened. The arguments began perfunctory. Senators praising security, praising stability, praising the need to reassure terrified citizens. No one mentioned Kamino. No one mentioned clones. No one mentioned the quiet knife sliding into the fabric of the Republic. Padme raised her hand when it was time. The gesture felt ordinary. That was what made it terrifying. Great shifts in governance did not arrive with thunder. They arrived with paperwork. Across the chamber, Sheev watched. His posture on the central dais was relaxed, almost regal. He did not look like a man scrambling to hold a republic together. He looked like a monarch listening to vassals ask permission to exist. Padme did not meet his eyes. She stared at the voting indicator as if it were a verdict. The tally rose. Green lights. More green. A few red, idealists, fools, or those too stubborn to be frightened. The motion passed. Applause was minimal. Senators were too tired for celebration. They moved on to the next item as if nothing had happened, as if an army had not just been quietly fed. Padme's throat tightened. She forced herself to breathe. Mon's voice came over the private channel, low and controlled. "It's done," she said. Bale's reply was equally controlled. "Phase 1, he said. Padme closed her eyes for a heartbeat. "Phase 1, Dois." The words made it sound organized, safe, as if they were building a bridge rather than digging a grave. When she opened her eyes, Sheev was looking directly at her. Padme's pulse spiked. She kept her face smooth, her posture composed. She gave him the faintest nod, respectful, dutiful, meaningless. The kind of gesture senators used to survive. Sheev's smile in response was small and warm, the smile of a leader grateful for cooperation. Padme felt cold down to her bones. Gratitude was not what she saw behind that smile. She saw satisfaction, as if she had placed a piece exactly where he wanted it, even if she did not know the board. The session continued. The war continued. And somewhere far away, on a storm-racked ocean world, a production line would accelerate. The Senate representative appeared as a masked hologram, voice distorted, face hidden behind a shifting veil of light. It was unnecessary theater, but Lama understood organic comfort. Secrets were easier to hold when they looked dramatic. "You have received authorization," the representative said. "Funding has been approved under Senate administrative allocation. The cohort will proceed." Lama's head inclined. "Kamino is pleased to serve the Republic," he replied, voice smooth. "As we have since the beginning." The representative's tone tightened. "You will serve the Senate," they corrected. Lama did not smile. "The Senate is the Republic's purchasing body," he said. "This is understood." Ton stood at his shoulder, still as a statue. Nala lingered near the edge of the chamber, half in shadow, watching with eyes that missed nothing. "The cohort will be trained for institutional security," the representative continued. "No battlefield deployments without Senate quorum." Lama's fingers tapped the table once. "Agreed," he said. "The cohort will be conditioned to respond only to Senate-authorized command strings," the representative said. "No executive overrides." Nala's gaze sharpened. Lama's voice remained steady. "Kamino will implement the requested architecture," he said. There was a pause. The hologram flickered slightly, as if the representative had shifted position. "You understand the risk," they said. "If the Chancellor discovers this..." Lama's expression remained bland. "Kamino understands many risks," he said. "We have built our civilization on managing variables." Ton spoke, voice polite. "We require additional stipulations," she said. The representative hesitated. "Such as?" Ton's tone stayed formal. "Security for Kaminoan facilities," she said. "In the event of executive interference, the Senate will provide diplomatic protection. Our production cannot be threatened without consequence." The hologram's head tilted. "You are demanding protection," they said. Lama's thin smile returned. "We are negotiating stability," he corrected. Nala watched the hologram and thought of Corasont. Thought of politicians promising protection the way people promised weather. The representative said, "The Senate cannot openly defend unauthorized production." Ton's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then the Senate should ensure it remains authorized," she said, and the subtle emphasis was a blade hidden in velvet. The representative's hologram flickered again. "You will receive sealed guarantees," they said at last. "Contingent upon maintenance of secrecy." Lama inclined his head. "Secrecy is a Kaminoan specialty," he said. Nala felt a pulse of grim amusement. The Senate thought it was buying a safeguard. Kamino was buying leverage. And somewhere in the middle, clones would be born with new oaths etched into their minds like carved runes. The representative's voice lowered. "We will require a confirmation of cohort readiness," they said. "Estimated deployment window." Nala stepped forward slightly, speaking for the first time. "A limited number of subjects are already nearing operational maturity," she said. "Pre-existing pipeline units. Full cohort readiness will scale over time." The representative's hologram turned toward her. "You have already begun," they said, suspicion sharp. Nala did not apologize. "Kamino anticipates demand," she said simply. The representative's silence stretched, then broke. "Send the contract," they said. "We will apply the seals." Tawn produced a data crystal from within her sleeve and set it on the table. It looked small, insignificant, and yet it held the weight of armies. Lama's voice was almost gentle. "May the Senate find the stability it seeks," he said. The hologram flickered out. For a moment, only the sound of Kamino's storm remained, pressing against the walls like the ocean trying to breach. Nala stared at the darkened air where the hologram had been, and thought, not for the first time, that organics were always building walls to keep out threats they themselves had invited inside. Council chamber was a circle of stillness in a city of noise. Its stone arches held centuries of meditation, yet war had crept in anyway, like smoke finding cracks. Mace Windu sat with his back straight, eyes hard. Yoda's small form seemed almost swallowed by his seat, but his presence filled the room in a way few others could. Obi-Wan stood in the center, hands folded, reporting with the calm cadence of someone who had learned to speak of death without letting it show on his face. "Supply lines remain strained," Obi-Wan said. "The clones perform efficiently, but the scale of conflict is increasing. There are rumors." Mace's gaze sharpened. "Rumors," he repeated. Obi-Wan hesitated. "Whispers among Republic staff," he said. "That additional clone resources are being arranged beyond standard military requisition. I have no confirmation." Yoda's ears angled slightly. "Beyond," Yoda echoed. "What mean beyond?" Obi-Wan's mouth tightened. "Civil defense allocations," he said. "Institutional security, Senate-based procurement." Mace's jaw clenched. "The Senate is creating its own force," he said, and his tone made it sound like sacrilege. "And if the Chancellor holds all armies without oversight," Obi-Wan said carefully, "that also compromises the Republic." Silence dropped. It was dangerous to speak that truth aloud, even here. Yoda's voice was soft. "War changes all," he said. "To save the Republic, become what we fight we may." Mace's hands tightened on his seat's edge. "We have obligations," he said. "To the Senate, to the Chancellor, to the people." Obi-Wan's gaze flicked down, then up again. "And to the Force," he added, quieter. Yoda nodded slowly. "Investigate we should," he said, "but carefully. Shadows, many there are." Mace's eyes narrowed. "The clones themselves trouble me," he admitted, and the confession sounded like a blade reluctantly revealed. "They are too obedient, too willing." Obi-Wan's expression tightened. He thought of clones saluting, of young faces behind helmets, of men bred to die for ideals they'd never been allowed to choose. "They were made for this," he said. "That is the trouble," Mace replied. Yoda's gaze shifted, distant. "A trap, perhaps," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Obi-Wan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stormlight. He remembered Qui-Gon's voice in memory. Quiet certainty, a warning about living force and living choices. He wondered what his old master would have thought of a republic defending itself with manufactured loyalty. The council deliberated, cautious, weary. They agreed to watch, to investigate without provoking. They did not yet understand how deeply the war had embedded itself into every institution, how every attempt to create safety was also creating a new chain. As Obi-Wan left the chamber, his thoughts lingered on Padme. She looked like a woman standing at the edge of something and pretending she could control the fall. Obi-Wan had seen that look before. In generals before doomed battles. In diplomats before betrayals. He did not know whether to warn her, to stop her, or to stand beside her and hope the fall could be softened. They trained in the rain because the rain never stopped. Kamino did not offer comfort. It offered endurance. The cohort stood in a line on a slick platform, armor bright against the dark sea. Their plating was almost identical to the Grand Army's standard issue, but with subtle differences. Deeper blue trim at the shoulder, a Senate sigil etched small on the chest like a noble house crest. They looked like knights sworn to a banner, except their banner was an institution, and their oaths were written into their nerves. The boy, on CT 7993, now a young man by accelerated years, stood among them with eyes forward. His posture was perfect. His breathing was calm. Rain slid down his helmet in thin streams. An instructor paced before them, voice carrying over the storm. "Protocol," he barked. "When an order arrives, what do you do?" The line answered as one. "Verify," they said. "Verify how?" "Seal authentication," they recited. "Quorum confirmation, sequential code validation." "Who do you serve?" "The Senate," they said, and the word landed heavy like a stone in water. The instructor's head snapped toward the young man. "Orex 7993, he called, using the cohort designation now attached to him. "If a commander gives you an order without verification." The young man did not hesitate. "I refuse," he said. "I request verification. I detain if necessary." The instructor nodded once. "If a Jedi gives you an order?" A pause, fractionally longer than, "I request verification," Orex said. "Jedi authority is operational. Senate authority is custodial." The instructor's mouth tightened approval hard. "Good," he said. "You are not here to be inspired. You are here to be correct." Nala watched from under a sheltered archway, rain misting the edge of the field around her. She kept her posture still, her expression controlled, but inside her mind ran like a machine. Correct. That was what they were building, a force trained not for glory but for procedure. It was in its own way more frightening than battlefield obedience. A soldier who obeyed a person could be swayed by charisma, by fear, by loyalty. A soldier who obeyed process could become immovable. A Kaminoan technician approached quietly. "They are performing within parameters," the technician said. Nala nodded. "And their emotional development?" "Stable," the technician said. "Less aggressive response. Higher tolerance for uncertainty. They do not panic easily." Nala's eyes stayed on Auric. He stood like stone in the rain. "What do they think of the Chancellor?" Nala asked. The technician hesitated. "They are taught that executive authority is lawful," they said. "But subordinate to Senate quorum. They regard the Chancellor as temporary." Nala's mouth tightened. Temporary. Everything organic was temporary. That was why organics feared losing power, because they could feel time's hands on their throats. In the line, Auric's head turned a fraction, as if sensing her gaze. For a heartbeat, through rain and helmet, Nala imagined she could see his eyes. She did not look away this time. "Dismiss," the instructor barked. The cohort moved as one, pivoting, marching into the storm toward their barracks. Their boots struck metal with a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Nala stood alone under the archway after they were gone, listening to the rain and the distant roar of ocean. She had built them to protect an institution. She wondered briefly whether they might one day decide that protecting the institution meant protecting it from the people inside it. On Corasont, rain did not smell like earth. It smelled like metal and heat. Still, on Padme's balcony, with the city stretched below like an endless tapestry of lights, it felt almost like standing over a sleeping kingdom. Bale held the sealed document case between both hands. It was heavier than it should have been. Or perhaps that was only what it represented. The first official confirmation from Kamino that the cohort had been accepted and placed into motion under Senate terms. Mon stood with her cloak drawn tight, her pale hair damp at the edges. Her eyes shone with a fierce brightness that made Padme think of distant stars, cold, stubborn, impossible to extinguish. Padme took the case from Bail carefully, as if it might burn her. The seal on it was crisp, Senate authorization, committee-coded, layered with verification keys. It was lawful. It was hidden. It was, in its own way, a lie. "We did it," Mon said, voice soft. Padme stared at the seal. "We began it," she corrected. Bail's face was calm, but there was tension in his jaw. "We have to decide what we are," he said. "If we are building a safeguard, we must behave like one. We must be stricter than the thing we fear." "No." Mon nodded once. "No personal use," she said. "No political intimidation, no enforcement outside the Senate district without quorum. Full records sealed, but complete." Padme's mouth tightened. "And if the Senate itself becomes compromised?" she asked quietly. Bail's gaze met hers, unflinching. "Then we have built a blade," he said. "And we will have to decide where it points." A gust of wind drove rain harder across the balcony, spattering their cloaks. Below, Corasant's traffic streams glowed indifferent. Life continued while governments plotted. Mon stepped closer. "We are doing this because we believe the Republic can be saved," she said. "Not because we want control." Padme felt the weight of that belief, heavy as armor. "Belief isn't enough," she whispered. "The Republic is made of people. People lie. People get tired. People get afraid." Bail's voice was gentle. "So do we," he said. Padme looked down at the case again, then lifted her gaze to the horizon where the city lights blurred into storm. She thought of Naboo's lakes, of clear water and green hills, of a simpler life that had never truly existed. She thought of the Jedi, of Obi-Wan's warning. She thought of Anakin's hands trembling when he begged her to stop if it went wrong. "We need an oath," Mon said suddenly, voice steady. "Not for the clones, for us." Bail's eyebrows rose slightly. "An oath," he echoed, and something like sorrow flickered in his eyes, as if he recognized how desperate it was to bind themselves with words when the world was already unraveling. Mon held out her hand. "To the Republic," she said. "To the Senate as an institution, not as individuals. To the people we serve." Bail placed his hand over hers without hesitation. "To restraint," he added. "To oversight. To ending this if it becomes another instrument of tyranny." Padme stared at their hands. For a moment, she felt like she was looking at a ritual from an older time. Lords swearing loyalty in a castle tower, while wars raged beyond the walls. She placed her hand on top of theirs. The rain cooled her skin. The city's glow warmed her face. "To the Republic," she said, and her voice shook slightly despite her effort. "To the people, to stopping power from swallowing law." They stood like that for a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if time itself might listen and decide to be kinder. Then Padme drew her hand back, and the air felt colder. "We can't tell anyone else," Bail said. "Not yet." Mon's jaw tightened. "Secrecy is a poison," she said. "But we're already poisoned." Padme looked toward the balcony door, where Anakin waited inside, pretending he wasn't watching. She wondered how many more things she would have to hide, and what hiding would do to her soul. Below, the city roared on. And far away, on Kamino, clones marched in rain under a banner they had never seen. Sheev dismissed his aides early. It was not an act of kindness. It was an act of focus. People cluttered rooms with their needs, their loyalties, their fears. He preferred a space clean enough to hear his own thoughts. The office lights were low, amber as firelight. Outside, Coruscant's storm made the skyline pulse with distant lightning. The city looked like a kingdom under siege, though most citizens would have insisted it was simply weather. Sheev sat at his desk, fingers steepled, watching a holographic seal spin slowly above the surface. Senate authorization. Committee coded. He had not needed to steal it. It had been delivered to him by the system itself, by inquisitive auditors, by board clerks, by the natural tendency of bureaucracy to leak when pressed. The seal turned, and in its rotation he saw 100 senators congratulating themselves on their own cleverness. Mass had asked if Sheev wanted names. Sly had offered to provide them within hours. Sheev had refused, not because he did not want knowledge, but because he wanted timing. Names were useful when you intended to strike. For now, he intended to watch. He reached out and paused the seal mid-spin, freezing it. A symbol of democracy trapped in light, motionless at his fingertips. He could destroy it with a gesture. He could also, if he chose, let it live. Let it grow into something that would justify further consolidation of power when it inevitably caused conflict. The thought warmed him more than the lamps did. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the storm's distant rumble fill the silence. In his mind, he traced the threads again. Padme's fear, Bael's restraint, Mon's fury. Kamino's cold ambition. Nala's clinical precision. The clones. Manufactured loyalty, engineered obedience, a knife built to defend an institution that did not understand it was holding the blade by the edge. When he opened his eyes, his expression was calm. He tapped to control, and the seal resumed its slow spin. "Let them have their safeguard," he murmured to the empty room. His voice was almost affectionate, the way one might speak of a child building a wall out of sand against the tide. Outside, lightning forked through the clouds, illuminating the city in stark white for a heartbeat. In that flash, Corasont looked less like a civilization and more like a carcass covered in jewels. Sheev watched the light fade. He smiled, because storms, he knew, were never simply weather. They were opportunity.